My brother said if he ever disappeared, I had to find you. He said you were the only one who would believe me." She pushed the envelope into his chest before his guards could stop her. Silas Moretti stared at the young woman standing in the rain outside his club. Her uniform was soaked. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were not afraid. He opened the envelope. One sentence, Daniel's handwriting. "If she finds you, it means I failed, but it also means I was right about you." Silas's jaw tightened. Daniel Collins had been dead to him for 7 years. If this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment right now telling us what city you are watching from. We want to see how far this story has traveled. The envelope was old, not old like something forgotten in a drawer. Old like something that had been carried for a long time. Handled carefully. Passed from nervous hand to nervous hand over weeks or months. The paper had softened at the creases the way paper does when someone has folded and unfolded it too many times. The way people handle things they are afraid to lose. Silas Moretti turned it over in his hands once then again and said nothing. His 2 guards stood on either side of the woman who had pushed past them. Normally, that kind of approach would have ended things very quickly. Nobody reached for Silas Moretti without being stopped. Nobody stepped past the iron boundary of the men who stood at his door without answering for it immediately. But she had moved so fast and spoken so clearly that for one fraction of a second, everyone froze, including Silas. And that second was enough. She was young. Mid-20s, he guessed. Her waitress uniform was dark at the shoulders from rain, and there was something on the front of her apron that looked like coffee, or perhaps soup from a long shift. Her hair was pulled back, but the rain had loosened pieces of it around her face. She was not beautiful in the way the women who moved through his world were beautiful. She had not been prepared or curated. She looked like someone who had just gotten off a double shift and walked directly into the worst decision of her life. But her eyes. That was the thing he kept coming back to later. Her eyes were completely clear. Not brave in the reckless way of someone who did not understand danger. She understood it. He could see that she understood it. Her jaw was tight, and her shoulders were pulled in just slightly. The body language of someone managing fear rather than someone without it. She was terrified. She was standing there anyway. "Marco," Silas said quietly. Marco, his head guard, stepped forward, his hand already moving toward her arm. "Wait." Marco stopped. Silas looked at the woman again. "What is your name?" "Emma Collins." He let the name sit for a moment. "And you said your brother told you to find me." "Yes." "What is your brother's name?" She answered him without hesitation. "Daniel Collins." The sound of rain against the pavement was the only thing that existed for approximately 3 full seconds after she said that name. Silas did not move. He did not blink. He was very good at controlling his face, and he controlled it now, but something happened inside his chest that he had not expected. Something that felt almost like a fist tightening around a nerve. Daniel Collins. "Come inside," Silas said. Marco looked at him. The look said everything. She could be armed. She could be wired. She could be a plant. This is exactly the kind of approach someone uses when they want to get close. Silas gave Marco a look back that closed the conversation. "Bring her in, check her at the door, then bring her to the office." He turned and walked back inside without waiting to hear her reaction. The office on the 2nd floor of the Meridian Club was not what most people expected when they imagined where Silas Moretti conducted serious business. There were no weapons on the walls, no symbols of power arranged to impress visitors. There was a desk, dark wood, clean surface, a single lamp casting warm light, 2 chairs across from it, a bookshelf that was actually used, a window that looked down at the rain-slicked street below. Silas was standing at that window when Marco brought Emma in. She sat down without being told to, not with arrogance, with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent years in environments where she needed to manage herself carefully. Marco set a small folding knife on the desk. "That was everything." "Thank you. Leave us." Marco hesitated for exactly the length of time it took to make clear he disapproved, then left, pulling the door closed behind him. Silas turned away from the window and looked at Emma Collins for the first time with real attention. She was looking at the knife on the desk. "It was my mother's," she said quietly. "I've carried it for years. I'm not here to threaten you." "I know," Silas said. He picked up the knife and held it for a moment, then set it down on her side of the desk. "Tell me everything your brother said to you." Emma looked at the knife, then at him. "He said that if anything ever happened to him, I needed to find Silas Moretti. He said not to go to the police. He said not to call anyone I didn't know personally. He said to carry the envelope and to give it to you, and only you, and that you would understand." "What else?" "He said—" She paused. He watched her press her lips together briefly, managing something. "He said you were a good man once, and that you deserve to know the truth." Silas sat down across from her. "When did he disappear?" 3 months ago. "You waited 3 months to come here." "I spent the first month trying to find him myself." She met his eyes steadily. "I went to his apartment. I talked to his neighbors. I filed a missing persons report which accomplished nothing. I talked to the 2 friends he had left, and they hadn't heard from him in weeks before he disappeared. I went through everything he owned that he'd stored at my place." She stopped. "Then I found a second envelope. Inside a book on my shelf. He must have left it when I wasn't home. Inside that envelope was a note and your name and the address of this club." "What did the note say?" She reached into the pocket of her apron and produced a folded piece of paper. She set it on the desk between them without touching his side of it. Silas picked it up. "Emma, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have not been able to find me. Do not look anymore. It is not safe. Take the other envelope and find Silas Moretti at the Meridian Club on West Fulton. Give him only the sealed envelope, nothing else, no other information about yourself. He is a dangerous man, but he is a fair one, or he used to be. I believe he still is. I believe that if he understands what I know, he will do the right thing. I love you. I am sorry I could not tell you more. Stay safe." The handwriting was precise and controlled. The kind of handwriting that came from a person who thought carefully before putting anything on paper. Daniel's handwriting. Silas had seen that handwriting on hundreds of documents 7 years ago. He set the note down. "How long had he been acting differently before he disappeared?" Silas asked. His voice came out measured and calm. He was extremely good at calm. Emma's expression shifted slightly. Not with suspicion exactly, but with something like recalibration. Like she had expected a different kind of reaction. "About 4 months before he disappeared, he started changing. Small things at first. He told me not to post on social media anymore, but he made it sound like advice, like he was worried about privacy in general. Then he said I should vary my routes when I walked home from work. He got me a new phone and told me to only call him from that number." "Did he explain why?" "He said he was being cautious about something at work." "Where was he working?" "Accounting. He did accounting consulting. Private clients, he said. He never told me much about his work, and I never pushed because he was private about it. He always had been." Silas absorbed that. He kept his expression neutral. "What changed in the last weeks before he disappeared?" Emma's hands resting on her knees tightened slightly. "He started coming by the diner where I work more often. Not eating. Just sitting at the counter for a few minutes and watching the door. Once I came out of the kitchen and he was standing right there, and he grabbed my arm, and I could feel how hard he was gripping even through my sleeve. He said, 'If I ever tell you to leave somewhere immediately, you leave. You don't ask questions, you don't wait for me, you go.' I tried to ask him what was happening, and he said, 'I'm handling it, just do what I say.'" She stopped, looked at her own hands. "The last time I saw him was on a Tuesday evening. He came to the diner at the end of my shift. He seemed calmer than he had been. He bought me a cup of coffee, and we talked about nothing for 20 minutes. Normal things. He asked about a coworker of mine whose daughter had just been born. He reminded me that our mother's birthday would have been that weekend. He told me I looked tired and I should take better care of myself." She paused. "It felt like a normal conversation. That's what scared me later. It felt too normal. Like he was making sure everything was okay before something he knew was coming. And then he was gone. I called him the next morning, and his phone was disconnected. I went to his apartment that afternoon. His landlord said he'd paid 2 months ahead and asked for no contact. His car was still in the lot. His wallet was on the kitchen counter. His phone was in the trash, the SIM card removed. She stopped again. He was gone. But he didn't run. He planned to disappear. Silas was quiet for a long time. Emma did not fill the silence. Most people filled silence because it made them uncomfortable. She sat in it the way a person sits in it when they have already said everything and are simply waiting to see what happens next. "I need to ask you something," Silas said finally, "and I need you to understand that how you answer matters more than you know." She nodded once. "Did Daniel ever tell you anything specific about who he was working for or what he was investigating?" "No." "Did he give you any names? Anyone he mentioned even in passing?" "No." "Did he tell you anything about me, about my organization?" Emma looked at him directly. "He said you controlled something underground in Chicago. He said you were powerful, and that powerful people in your position were usually surrounded by people who wanted something from them, and that sometimes those people were dangerous in ways that took years to see. He said—" She hesitated. "He said you deserved better than that." Something moved across Silas's face that he did not fully manage to suppress. "He said that—" His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Yes." Silas turned and looked at the window again. The rain was heavier now. Beneath them, Chicago moved the way it always moved, indifferent and relentless. Daniel Collins had believed he deserved better. Daniel Collins, the man. Silas had written off as a traitor for 7 years. He had told himself the story so many times it had become solid. 7 years ago, Daniel had been brought in to handle financial records. Not the kind of work people in Silas's world, typically assigned to someone from outside. But Silas had known Daniel's father years back before the old man died. He had made a kind of quiet promise the way men like Silas made promises without ceremony, without witnesses, but with the weight of something real. He would watch out for Daniel. He would give him work that was clean work that paid well, work that could build a future. Daniel had been exactly what Silas expected. Precise, reliable, completely without ambition for power. He came in, did his job, went home. He asked no unnecessary questions. He offered no opinions that weren't requested. He kept his head down and his work impeccable. And then one day, the accounts showed a problem. $200,000 moved through a sequence of transfers that looked accidental but weren't. The kind of pattern that required knowledge of how the accounts were structured to execute without detection. The only people with that knowledge were Silas's inner circle and Daniel. When Silas confronted the inner circle, one of them produced documentation. Careful, specific, damning documentation that pointed directly to Daniel. Silas had been furious. Not because of the money. The money was recoverable. Because of the trust. Because Daniel had been someone he believed in. He sent people to bring Daniel in. But Daniel was already gone. That disappearance at that specific moment had seemed like confirmation of everything the documentation suggested. An innocent man did not vanish at the exact moment questions were being asked about his integrity. That was what Silas had believed for 7 years. He had believed it completely. Until a wet young woman in a stained apron had walked into his rain-soaked entrance and handed him a piece of paper in Daniel's handwriting. "I was right about you." "I need to see everything you have," Silas said. He turned back from the window. "Every note from him, every unusual thing he told you, every person he mentioned even casually, everything." "I brought it," Emma said. She reached into the large bag she'd had over her shoulder and produced a worn canvas tote bag she'd kept tucked there. She set it on the desk between them. Silas looked at it. "You carried all of that here?" "I wasn't sure what you'd need." He opened it. Inside were folded papers, a small notebook with a different cover than the one in the envelope, a USB drive in a plastic Ziploc bag, 3 photographs, and a sealed manila envelope. He picked up the sealed envelope first. "He told me not to open that one," Emma said immediately. "He said only you were supposed to open it." Silas set it aside. He would open it, but not yet. He picked up the photographs first. The first photograph was Daniel and Emma, both younger, standing in front of what looked like a hospital entrance. Daniel had his arm around his sister's shoulders, and he was smiling, but the smile had the particular quality of someone smiling because they thought they should not, because they felt it. His eyes were looking just past the camera. The second photograph was Daniel alone. He was sitting at a table in what looked like a coffee shop, but he was not looking at whoever was taking the picture. He was looking across the room at something out of frame. The photograph had been taken without his awareness. Silas felt something cold move through him. Who took this? Emma looked at it. I don't know. It was in an envelope he mailed to my apartment. No return address, just that photograph and a note that said, "Keep this, you may need it later." I didn't understand what it meant. When did you receive it? About 6 months before he disappeared. Silas turned the photograph over. On the back, in small, careful writing he did not recognize, was a date, a time, and an address on the south side of Chicago. He kept his face completely neutral. But the address was one he knew. It was a building his organization had used for meetings. A building that very few people outside his inner circle knew existed. What had Daniel been doing there? The third photograph showed a man's back. Just a back. A man in a dark overcoat walking away from the camera. The image was slightly blurred, but the coat and the particular angle of the shoulders and something about the height and build of the figure made Silas's jaw tighten before he could stop it. He had seen that coat. He had stood beside the man who wore it. He set the photograph face down without letting Emma see his reaction. Did Daniel tell you anything about a man named Victor? Emma's expression shifted. No, not by name. But... She looked at him carefully. He mentioned once about 8 months ago that there was someone at his work, a senior partner, he said, who he didn't trust. He didn't give a name. He just said that sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who were most trusted by those above them, because they had spent years building the appearance of loyalty while doing something else entirely. The lamp on the desk flickered once. Neither of them moved. Silas picked up the small notebook. The handwriting inside was Daniel's, but abbreviated, compressed, almost coded. Dates, numbers, initials. Page after page of it dense and precise. He turned to the last entry. 3 words. He knows. Move Emma. Silas set the notebook down. 3 words that rewrote 7 years. He knows. Daniel had not run because he was guilty. He had run because someone discovered he knew something he was not supposed to know. And before he ran, his first instinct had been to protect his sister. You've been working double shifts, Silas said. He wasn't sure why he said it. It wasn't relevant to what needed to happen next, but he said it anyway. Emma looked at him. I always worked double shifts. Your brother knew that. My brother worried about that. He wanted me to have more. He was always talking about wanting me to have a better situation. I told him I didn't need better. I just needed things to be stable. We argued about it sometimes. She stopped. A small pause. He thought I deserved more than waiting tables. I thought he worried too much. He loved you. Yes. Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it that Silas recognized. The particular flatness of someone holding a great deal of feeling in a very small space. He was all I had. After our parents were gone, he was everything. He sacrificed things I didn't even know he was sacrificing. He turned down opportunities, better work, things that would have taken him further because he wanted to stay close, wanted to make sure I was safe. She looked at her hands again. And then when something actually threatened him, he didn't tell me. He just tried to handle it alone, because he didn't want you involved. I know that. I understand it. She stopped again. I just wish he had trusted me. Silas sat back in his chair. There was something in that sentence that hit a note he hadn't expected. Something almost physical. He had spent years surrounded by people who trusted him because they needed to. Because it served them to. Because fear and dependence were forms of trust that worked in the world he operated in. He could not remember the last time someone simply chose to trust him. Daniel had trusted him. Even after disappearing. Even after 7 years of silence. even with his sister's life. He is a dangerous man, but he is a fair one, or he used to be. I believe he still is. Used to be. That phrase stayed in the room with him like a second presence. I'm going to need you to stay somewhere safe, Silas said. If what I think is happening is actually happening, then your brother was right to keep you out of it, and you coming here tonight changed that. People who have been watching for movement on this situation now know you exist. Emma looked at him steadily. I've been living alone in a studio apartment for 3 months since my brother disappeared. I walk to work every day, and I walk home alone at night. I take care of myself. I don't doubt that. This is different. Different how? The kind of different that I don't want to explain to you in a way that frightens you more than necessary. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to trust me. Something moved through her expression. A complex thing that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite suspicion. My brother trusted you. Yes. And you thought he betrayed you. The room got quieter. Yes, Silas said. Why should I trust your judgment? He did not answer immediately. He let the question sit where it deserved to sit, without deflection, without the automatic authority he normally deployed when people pushed back. She had earned the question, and it deserved a real answer. Because I was wrong about your brother, he said finally, and knowing that changes things for me. Emma studied him for a moment longer. Then she nodded once, the kind of nod that meant she had made a decision and intended to hold to it regardless of what came next. All right, she said. What happens now? Silas opened the sealed envelope last. He did it alone in the office after Marco had taken Emma to a safe room on the 3rd floor with a lock she controlled from the inside and a phone that connected to security but not to the outside world. He sat at the desk in the lamplight with Daniel's sealed envelope in front of him. He had been carrying a particular kind of certainty for 7 years. The certainty that Daniel Collins had stolen from him and run. It was not a comfortable certainty because Daniel had been someone he valued. But it was a closed certainty. Finished. Put away. He broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. He opened it. Silas, if Emma has found you, then you have read what I left for her, and you already know something is wrong. I am writing this, knowing that if you are reading it, I have failed to resolve the situation on my own. I need you to know something first. I did not take that money 7 years ago. You know which money. The 200,000. I found it. I found where it had actually gone, and who had moved it. I was about to tell you when I realized I had been set up to look like the one who moved it. I ran because the documentation against me was too precise to fight directly, and because the person who created it had more access to your trust than I did. I knew that if I came to you, I would be stopped before I could say anything. I spent the years after building a case. I want you to understand that. I spent years documenting what I found. The USB drive Emma is carrying has copies of everything. Financial records, transfer patterns, company registrations, dates, amounts, and a name. The name is Victor Hale. He has been using your organization as a vehicle for his own financial operation for at least 9 years. The amount he has moved is not 200,000. The amount is closer to $40 million, moved through 12 shell companies across 4 countries. I made the mistake of getting close enough to the truth that he noticed. When he noticed, he moved to bury it. I could not let that happen. Not because of the money. Because he is going to keep doing this, and eventually the exposure will fall on you, not him, and you will not see it coming. You deserve to know. You still deserve to know. I am sorry I could not find a better way. Protect Emma. She knows nothing. She is just a girl who loved her brother enough to walk into the most dangerous place in Chicago because he asked her to. I was right about you, Silas. I know I was right. Daniel. Silas sat at the desk for a long time. The rain against the window was steady, and even the kind of rain that didn't have anywhere urgent to be. He turned the USB drive over in his hand. Small, ordinary looking, carrying 7 years of a man's work inside it. Victor Hale. Silas thought about Victor. He had worked alongside Victor Hale for 11 years. He knew the way this man laughed low and particular. He knew the coffee order Victor got from the place 2 blocks over, always the same thing, always too sweet. He knew Victor's daughter's name Adrienne, and that she'd had a difficult year in school the previous spring. He knew the way Victor's expression tightened when he was calculating something. He thought he had known what Victor was calculating. I thought it for 11 years. He had been wrong about Daniel Collins for 7. He was beginning to understand that he had been wrong about Victor Hale for much longer. He set the USB drive down on the desk. He looked at the rain. He thought about Daniel Collins, still out there somewhere 3 months gone, staying hidden, because someone with $40 million of stolen money and 11 years of access to Silas Moretti's trust was still powerful enough to be worth hiding from. And he thought about Emma Collins upstairs in a locked room, who had walked through the rain on a long shot from a missing man's last instruction, carrying a bag of evidence she didn't fully understand, and sitting across from the most powerful man she'd likely ever be in a room with, and looking at him like he was someone she had decided to trust, based on nothing more than her brother's word. Her brother, who had spent 7 years proving that his trust in Silas Moretti was not misplaced, even when Silas had not deserved it. He stood up from the desk. He picked up the USB drive and the notebook and Daniel's letter. He walked to the door and put his hand on the handle. And somewhere beneath the controlled certainty of the man who had run Chicago's most powerful underground organization for 2 decades, something that had been locked away for a very long time felt for the first time in years like it was turning. Not fear, not anger. Something quieter, something that felt unexpectedly and without warning, like the beginning of something he had not allowed himself in a long time. Purpose. He opened the door. He had work to do. The USB drive was the size of a thumb. Silas held it between 2 fingers and looked at it the way a man looks at something that has the potential to change everything he thought he understood about his own life. Small. Ordinary. The kind of thing you could carry in a pocket for years and nobody would know what it contained. $40 million. 12 shell companies. 9 years. Victor Hale. He set it down on the desk and picked up his phone. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before the other end picked up. "I need Reeves in my office in 20 minutes, Silas said. "No explanation. Just get him here." He hung up before the answer came. Then he sat alone in the lamplight with Daniel Collins's letter in his hand and read it one more time from the beginning. The way you read something when the first reading was too much and the second reading is when you actually absorb it. I spent the years after building a case. 7 years. While Silas had been running his operation and trusting Victor Hale with the kind of access that only 11 years of apparent loyalty could earn, Daniel Collins had been building a case. Hiding somewhere. Staying invisible. Working. Not because he wanted money. Not because he wanted revenge. Because he believed Silas deserved to know the truth. Silas folded the letter carefully and set it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He held it there for a moment, the paper flat against his chest. Then he stood, picked up the USB drive, and went upstairs to talk to Emma Collins. He knocked twice before using his key. Emma was sitting on the edge of the small couch, with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that someone had brought up. She had taken her apron off and folded it on the arm of the couch with a kind of automatic neatness that told him she was the type of person who kept order around her, because she could not always control the larger things. She looked up when he came in. "You read it?" "Yes." "What did it say?" Silas crossed to the chair across from her and sat down. "He told me what he knew, and he told me why he ran 7 years ago." He paused. "He was protecting himself long enough to build evidence. He was never coming back to fight me directly. He was going to hand me proof I could not ignore." Emma set the mug down slowly. "And did he build the proof? The drive you carried in that bag has 9 years of financial documentation." Silas met her eyes. "Your brother spent the better part of a decade building a case against the man who framed him, while living in hiding, while making sure you were safe, while I was sitting across a conference table from the man who set him up and trusting him completely." Emma was quiet for a moment. Her expression was controlled, but something moved through it. "So he was right." "About what?" "About you." She looked at him steadily. "He said you were fair. He said if you knew the truth, you would do something about it. I intend to. That's not what I'm asking. She leaned forward slightly. I'm asking if you believe it now, not about the evidence, about Daniel. Do you actually believe him? The question was direct enough that it pushed against something in Silas's chest. Not rudely, just honestly, the way a sharp question does when it cuts through the part of a person that usually deflects things. Yes, he said. I believe him. Emma looked at him for another moment. Then she sat back. Okay. Okay. Then I'll help you however I can. She said it simply, not dramatically. The way a person says something when they have already decided and are simply communicating the outcome. Tell me what you need. Reeves arrived 17 minutes later, not 20, which told Silas that whoever had relayed the message had conveyed the correct tone. Reeves was 41, former federal investigator, 2 years out of a career that had ended badly and quietly. Now the closest thing Silas had to an in-house analyst for situations that required precision rather than force. He was lean and spoke in a manner so economical that some people mistook it for coldness. It wasn't coldness, it was efficiency. Silas met him at the door of his office and handed him the USB drive before Reeves had fully crossed the threshold. Reeves looked at it. What's on it? Financial records spanning 9 years. Shell company registrations. Transfer patterns. I need you to verify the documentation, trace the company structures, and tell me what you can confirm independently within 24 hours. Reeves turned the drive over in his hand. 24 hours. Is that a question or a problem? Neither. Reeves pocketed the drive. Whose money? Silas looked at him directly. Mine. Money that was supposed to be mine that was redirected over 9 years through 12 companies and ended up somewhere else. Reeves absorbed that without visible reaction. Who built the documentation on this drive? Someone I trusted 7 years ago, who I stopped trusting based on false evidence. Silas kept his voice completely even. I need you to verify it independently, not because I doubt it, because I need it to be unimpeachable. Understood. Reeves looked at him once more, reading the room with the particular attentiveness of someone who had spent years in situations where the thing not being said was more important than the thing being said. Anyone else in the building I should know about? A civilian. She's upstairs. She stays. Reeves nodded and left. Silas stood alone in his office for 30 seconds. Then he went back upstairs. Emma was still on the couch. She had pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, and she looked for the first time since he had met her 2 hours ago, like someone who was allowing herself to be tired. When did you last sleep? Silas asked. She looked at him like it was a strange question. What? You've been running on adrenaline since you got here. Before that, you were working a full shift. When did you actually sleep? I sleep fine. That wasn't the question. She gave him a look that carried the specific exasperation of a woman who was accustomed to deflecting concern. I sleep when I can. I've been sleeping when I can for the past 3 months. It's fine. How long have you been working 2 jobs? The look sharpened. Why does that matter right now? It doesn't. I'm just asking. She studied him for a moment. Since I was 19, after our parents died. I was in college, and the financial aid didn't cover everything, and Daniel was doing what he could, but he had his own situation. So I picked up shifts where I could. She paused. I finished school. It took me an extra year, but I finished. And then I kept working the same way, because it was what I knew how to do, and the money was stable. What did you study? Business administration. A small dry note in her voice. Very useful for a waitress. Why didn't you use it? She was quiet for a moment. By the time I graduated, Daniel had a good situation, and we were both stable, and it seemed like the right time to look for something in my field. And then our mother got sick, and I had the diner job, and the schedule was flexible, and I could be available when she needed me, so I stayed. And then she passed. And then it was just Daniel and me, and the diner job was familiar, and I was tired. She stopped. I kept telling myself I would make changes later. Later kept not arriving. Silas said nothing. Emma looked at him sideways. You're doing that thing. What thing? The thing where you ask questions that seem like small talk, but you're actually trying to understand something. He allowed a small pause. Is it working? Despite everything, something moved across her face that was almost the edge of a smile. Not quite, but close. Maybe. She fell asleep on the couch at some point close to 2 in the morning. She did not intend to. She had been talking, and then she was quiet. And then when Silas looked over from the desk across the room, she was asleep with her head tilted against the back cushion and her hands still loosely folded in her lap. He watched her for a moment. She looked asleep younger than she had seemed awake, which was a strange thought because awake she already seemed young. But asleep, the particular controlled competence of her face relaxed completely, and underneath it was something that looked like exhaustion that went deeper than one night. Silas got up quietly. He took the jacket from the back of his chair and crossed the room and laid it over her carefully without waking her. He went back to his desk. He picked up his phone and dialed Victor Hale's personal number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Victor's voice, smooth and familiar, the cadence of a man who had spent years being someone people found reassuring. Silas hung up without leaving a message. He sat with the phone in his hand. 11 years. He tried to walk back through 11 years of Victor Hale, tried to find the seams, the places where the performance had cracked even slightly. Because if you spent 9 years redirecting $40 million through 12 companies, there had to be seams, there had to be moments, and there had been moments. He saw them now, rearranged by what he knew. The way Victor had been the loudest voice insisting that Daniel's disappearance was confirmation of guilt. The way Victor had managed the documentation against Daniel with a kind of efficiency that had seemed at the time like competence. The way he had gently, consistently positioned himself as the person Silas should rely on most in the aftermath. Not suspicious taken individually, but 11 years of individually unsuspicious moments had a different shape when you laid them all on the same surface. Reeves called at 4:47 in the morning. Silas picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me. I've been through about a third of the drive." Reeves's voice was flat and careful in the way of someone delivering something significant. "The documentation is real. I've been able to independently verify 8 of the company registrations through public records. They exist. The account structures are internally consistent and match known transfer patterns I can cross-reference from my previous work." A pause. "Silas, if the rest of the drive is as solid as what I've seen so far, this is one of the most comprehensive pieces of financial fraud documentation I've ever looked at. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. How long to finish verifying the rest?" "Another 18 hours, maybe less." "Keep going. You don't stop until it's done." "Understood." Another pause. "The name on the primary registrations, the person who signed on behalf of the shell companies. It's always one of 3 signatories who rotate, but the controlling party in every structure is the same, consistent across 9 years." Silas already knew what was coming. He said it anyway. "Tell me." Victor Hale. The name sat in the air of the quiet office like something physical. "Keep going," Silas said. "I'll be in touch." He hung up. He sat in the dark for a long moment. $40 million, 9 years. The man he had coffee with twice a week. The man who had sat across from him in this very room and talked about his daughter's school troubles. The man who had been the loudest, most convincing voice in the room when they were deciding what to do about Daniel Collins's disappearance. The most dangerous people are the ones who are most trusted by those above them. Daniel had said that. Emma had repeated it. Both of them had been right. Emma woke up at 6 in the morning. She came into his office and stood in the doorway with his jacket still over her shoulders and her hair loose from the overnight, and looked at him with clear eyes that told him she was one of those people who woke up without transition, already alert. "You didn't sleep." "No." "What did you find out?" He looked at her. "The documentation on the drive is real. My analyst confirmed it. The financial structures exist. The pattern is exactly what your brother described." He paused. Victor Hale has been systematically redirecting money from my organization through shell companies for 9 years. Your brother found it 7 years ago, was framed for it, and spent the time since documenting it completely. Emma stood in the doorway and absorbed that. Then she said, "Where is Victor Hale right now?" His phone went to voicemail at 2 in the morning. That could mean he was asleep and not answering. It could mean something else. You think he knows something is happening? I think he has been doing this for 9 years without being caught, and that requires a very high level of alertness. If your coming here was observed, he may already be aware. Silas stood up from the desk. Which means we need to move faster than I intended. Emma straightened slightly. Tell me what to do. I need to know everything your brother talked about in the weeks before he disappeared. Not just the instructions he gave you about staying safe. Everything. Every conversation. Every offhand comment. Every small thing that seemed meaningless at the time. She nodded immediately. Sit down. I'll go through it from the beginning. They sat across from each other, and she talked for 2 hours straight. It was not dramatic. It was meticulous. She went back 6 months, then 8, then a year, pulling up conversations and moments and small observations with the particular clarity of a person who had been quietly cataloging everything since the night her brother disappeared, storing details in the way you store things when you know you are going to need them eventually, even if you don't know how. Silas listened without interrupting, except to ask precise questions at specific moments. She remembered a name. Not Victor. Not Hale. A name Daniel had mentioned once, almost in passing, the kind of passing that was designed to sound like nothing. He'd said something about running into someone from work at a place on the north side, and he'd said the man's name, and the way he'd said it was too careful. Too neutral. The name was Garrett. Silas went still. First name or last name? Last. He said Garrett was there. That's all. And then he changed the subject very quickly. Silas knew a Garrett. Thomas Garrett, mid-level, worked in logistics coordination for the organization. Not someone Silas dealt with directly. Someone who interfaced with Victor. Someone who would have access to certain information that Silas would not have thought twice about. What else? Silas said. She pulled up a memory from 4 months before the disappearance. Daniel had made a comment dismissible on its face about how extraordinary it was that certain kinds of financial crime could persist for years inside large organizations, because the person responsible had been granted such deep trust that the anomalies were simply attributed to errors or legitimate complexity. He'd framed it as a general observation, the kind of thing a person in accounting might say. But he'd made it while looking out the window and not at Emma. And he'd made it once and never repeated it. He was telling you something, Silas said. I know that now. I thought he was just talking. He was talking. He just couldn't be direct about it. Silas paused. Your brother is very careful. Emma looked at him steadily. He learned to be. He spent 3 months watching what happened to him when he wasn't careful enough. At 8 in the morning, one of Silas's people knocked and entered with a tablet, showing a live feed from an exterior camera. Victor Hale had arrived at the Meridian Club. He was standing on the sidewalk outside speaking into his phone, and his body language was exactly the wrong kind of casual. The kind of casual that a person performs when they are trying to appear relaxed and are not quite managing it. Silas looked at the feed for a long moment. Then he looked at Emma. I need you to go back upstairs, he said. And I need you to stay there. The door locks from your side and stays locked. You do not open it for anyone except me. Why is he here? He may be testing, checking whether anything has changed. He doesn't know I have the drive. He doesn't know you're here. Silas met her eyes. And I need him to not know. Not yet. Not until Reeves has finished verifying everything. Emma looked at the tablet. At the image of Victor Hale standing outside with his performed casual stance and his phone. Her jaw tightened slightly. He's the one who took my brother from me. Yes. And he's standing outside your door like he belongs here. He thinks he does. That's exactly what I need him to keep thinking. Silas handed the tablet back to his man. Emma, I need you to trust me on the timing of this. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. The kind of moment where a person is deciding something real, not just answering a question. "All right," she said. "But Silas." "Yes. Don't let him walk away clean." Her voice was quiet and completely level. "My brother spent 7 years of his life on this. Whatever you do with it, don't let Victor Hale walk away clean." "He won't," Silas said. "I promise you that." He met Victor in the main room downstairs. Victor came in with the particular ease of a man who had been welcomed into this building for 11 years. He had coffee from the place 2 blocks over, too sweet, the same order he always got. He was wearing a charcoal blazer over a dark shirt, everything fitted and considered. He was a good-looking man of 53, who moved through rooms with the practiced comfort of someone accustomed to being seen as an asset wherever he went. He saw Silas, and his expression arranged itself into something warm and easy. "Silas, I tried to reach you last night. I heard from Garrett that there may have been a situation at the door. Everything all right?" Garrett? He'd heard from Garrett. Silas filed that away so deep and so fast, it didn't show on his face at all. "Nothing serious. Someone who had the wrong address." He gestured to the table. "Sit down. Tell me about the Bridgeport accounts." This was an existing piece of business, a set of financial structures. Victor managed for him, completely legitimate. Silas raised it now, deliberately, the way you offer something familiar to a man you are watching closely. The way you create a normal scene so you can observe how someone performs in it when they are slightly off balance. Victor sat. He talked about the Bridgeport accounts with complete fluency. Dates, figures, projections. He had it all in his head, accessible, immediately organized. It was genuinely impressive. The particular impressiveness of a man who had been juggling 2 separate financial realities in parallel for years and had never once let the seams show. Silas sat across from him and listened, and kept his face in the arrangement of attentive interest. It was always in when he listened to Victor report. Somewhere upstairs, Emma Collins was behind a locked door. In Reeves's back room, the USB drive Daniel Collins had spent 7 years building was being processed piece by piece. And across the table, Victor Hale drank his too sweet coffee and talked about account structures, and didn't know that the thing he had been protecting himself against for 7 years had arrived the night before, in the form of a soaking wet waitress with an old canvas bag. "You seem tired," Victor said. He said it with the easy, observant warmth of someone who paid attention to people and used it to maintain closeness. "Late night," Silas said. "Anything I can help with?" "Not yet." Silas met his eyes with the direct, settled confidence he had used for 2 decades. "But I'll let you know." Victor held his gaze for a half-beat longer than usual. Then he smiled. "Of course." When Victor left, Silas went back upstairs. Emma opened the door before he knocked. She had been standing near it. "Well," she said. "He's nervous. He heard there was a situation at the door last night, which means someone watched and reported back to him." Silas came inside and closed the door behind him. "He has a contact in this building, someone who feeds him information." "Garrett." "Yes." He looked at her. "Your brother mentioned that name for a reason. He knew." Emma sat down heavily. "How many people has he compromised?" "I don't know yet." Silas's voice was controlled, but underneath it was something that had the temperature of genuine fury. Not the hot, reactive kind. The cold, determined kind. The kind that didn't go away. "But I'm going to find out." She looked at him. "He was in your building, sitting at your table, pretending everything was fine." "Yes." "And you sat there and let him." "I sat there and learned something." He met her eyes. There is a difference between walking away from something and waiting for the right moment. Your brother understood that. He spent 7 years waiting for the right moment, instead of walking away or confronting something he couldn't win directly. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He never talked about it that way. As a strategy. He just called it being careful." "Being careful is a strategy. He would have liked you to say that." A pause. "He talked about you sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. He said you were the kind of person who made things work because you understood patience. He said most people in your position relied on fear. He said you relied on something harder to name. What did he call it? She looked at him directly. Judgment. Silas said nothing. I was right, Emma said quietly. Even if you got it wrong once. Even if someone worked very hard for a very long time to make you get it wrong. She paused. Everyone gets it wrong. What matters is what you do when you find out. Reeves called at 11 that morning. I'm done, he said. Silas's hand tightened on the phone. Tell me. Every piece of documentation on that drive is verified. I've confirmed the existence of all 12 shell companies across 4 jurisdictions. I've traced the transfer patterns through 3 independent methodologies, and they all converge to the same origin and the same destination. I've confirmed the signatory information on 9 of the 12 company registrations directly. A pause. The total redirected amount across 9 years is $43,200,000 and change. The primary controlling party on every structure is Victor Hale. There are 2 secondary parties. Another pause. One of them is Thomas Garrett. Silas stood very still. The second secondary party, Reeves continued, is someone I didn't expect. Who? Marcus Webb. Webb. Webb was Silas's external legal counsel. Had been for 8 years. The man who structured every significant business arrangement Silas entered into. The man who knew in some cases more about Silas's operations than Silas himself. 3 people. Victor Hale, who had his trust for 11 years. Thomas Garrett, who had informed him last night that something had happened at the door. Marcus Webb, who had the legal architecture of his entire operation mapped in his files. Silas stood in the quiet of his office and absorbed the full weight of what that meant. Silas, Reeves said. He almost never used his name. You need to move on this before they do. If Garrett reported last night's incident to Hale, and Hale is already thinking clearly about what it might mean, you don't have much time. How much documentation do we have? Enough for a federal case that would put all 3 of them away for decades, if you want to go that route. And if I want to go another route, a pause. Then you have enough to bury them in whatever way you choose. The documentation is ironclad either way. Silas made a decision in the particular way he had always made decisions. Not quickly, not emotionally, but with the settled finality of someone who had thought through all the available directions and chosen one. I want it clean, he said. I want it permanent, and I want it to mean something. Define mean something. Daniel Collins spent 7 years of his life building that evidence. He spent 7 years protecting his sister and waiting for the right moment because he believed the truth should be handled correctly. Silas picked up Daniel's letter from the desk. Held it for a moment. I'm going to handle it correctly. Federal. Federal. He paused. But first, I'm going to make sure that Victor Hale understands exactly how he was caught, and by whom. Reeves was quiet for a moment. That's personal. Yes, Silas said. It is. He hung up. He stood in the office alone with Daniel's letter and the weight of a decision that he knew would dismantle 11 years of structure in his world. And underneath the weight of it, somewhere below the calculation and the control and the cold determined fury, was something else. Something that felt quietly and without announcement, like the first step toward becoming someone who deserved the trust of the people who had trusted him. He folded Daniel's letter, put it back in his pocket, and went to find Emma Collins. He had something to tell her. And for the first time in a very long time, what he had to say was the truth and nothing else, and he found that was exactly enough. He found Emma in the upstairs room exactly where he had left her, but she was standing now instead of sitting, and the way she was standing told him she had been pacing. She stopped when he came in and looked at his face and read something in it immediately. What happened? She said. Reeves finished verifying the drive. And everything your brother documented is real, all of it. Verified independently across 4 jurisdictions. He came into the room and closed the door. There are 3 people involved. Victor Hale, who ran the primary structure. Thomas Garrett, who you identified last night without knowing you were identifying him. And a 3rd man named Marcus Webb, who is my legal counsel. Emma sat down slowly. Your lawyer? My lawyer. For 8 years. She pressed her hands flat against her knees. So Victor Hale didn't just steal from you. He built an entire team inside your organization and spent 9 years making sure they were positioned exactly where they needed to be. Yes. And all 3 of them were here this morning, in your building. Garrett and Hale were here. Webb has an office 3 blocks over with files on every significant arrangement I've made in the past 8 years. Silas sat down across from her. His voice was measured, but she had been around him long enough in the past 12 hours to hear what was underneath it. Your brother didn't just find a theft, Emma. He found the architecture of a takeover. If this had continued another 2 or 3 years, Victor would have had enough leverage, enough documented involvement by my name in structures he controlled that he could have removed me entirely and stepped into the position I built. Emma stared at him. He wasn't stealing from you, she said slowly. He was replacing you, gradually, carefully, with the patience of someone who understood that I was not a man you could move against directly. Silas held her gaze. And he nearly pulled it off. If Daniel hadn't found it when he did, and if Daniel hadn't spent 7 years building something unimpeachable instead of just disappearing and staying gone, I would have walked into that outcome without seeing it coming. The room was very quiet for a moment. We have to move now, Silas said. Garrett reported last night's incident to Victor. Victor was here this morning to take the temperature of the room. He is going to be thinking about what that report means, and he is going to start making decisions based on the answer he arrives at. If he decides it means something, he will start moving. Emma's jaw tightened. Then what do we do? We control what happens next before he gets there. Silas made 3 calls in the next 15 minutes. The first was to a federal contact he had maintained for years. A relationship built on the particular pragmatism of 2 people who understood that the most stable version of the world they both operated in required a certain amount of communication that was not officially documented. He told the contact he had financial documentation of federal significance and needed 48 hours to organize a clean handover. The contact asked 1 question. Silas answered it. The call lasted 4 minutes. The second call was to Marco, his head of security, in a room downstairs. He told Marco to remove Thomas Garrett from the building, quietly hold him in the lower office, and ensure that Garrett's phone made no outgoing calls. Marco asked no questions. The call lasted 45 seconds. The third call was to his own scheduling assistant, who he told to contact Victor Hale and arrange a meeting for that evening. A routine meeting, he said. Monthly review of the Bridgeport accounts. Nothing unusual. He hung up from the third call and looked at Emma. Victor will come to that meeting, he said. Because if he doesn't, it signals that something has changed in his approach to this building, and he won't want to signal that. He'll come because coming is what he always does. Emma looked at him steadily. And when he gets here, I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what has happened. A pause. But before that, I need to talk to Garrett. Garrett was in the lower office when Silas came down. I was sitting in the chair with the particular posture of someone who had been told to sit and had not been given any other instructions, which left a person in a state of suspended alertness that was difficult to maintain without showing. He was younger than Silas had thought about him directly, maybe 38, with the forgettable face of someone who had probably spent his career being underestimated. He looked up when Silas came in, and his expression did something complicated and rapid that he then managed into something more neutral. Silas, he said. The tone was calibrated, not panicked, not aggressive, carefully positioned in the middle where someone stays when they don't yet know what is known about them. Silas sat down across from him and said nothing for a moment. Garrett let the silence sit for approximately 6 seconds before he cracked it. Marco said you needed to talk to me. Yes. Is there a problem with something? There is. Silas leaned back in his chair. I want to give you the opportunity to tell me the truth, Thomas. Not because it changes the outcome significantly, but because I'd like to know whether you're the kind of man who tells the truth when there's no longer any advantage to lying. Garrett's face went through another rapid series of micro-adjustments that he then locked down. I don't know what you're referring to. Victor Hale. The name landed. Silas watched it land. Garrett's jaw moved slightly. I work with Victor on several accounts. That's not a secret. No. What's a secret is that you're a signatory on 4 of the 12 shell companies Victor used to redirect $43 million from my organization over 9 years. Silas kept his voice completely level. That is the secret. Garrett said nothing. The absence of a denial was its own kind of answer. You called him last night, Silas continued. When you heard there had been a situation at the door, you reported it to him before you reported it to me, which tells me that your primary loyalty in this building has not been to me for some time. Garrett's face had gone carefully blank. I think I should have legal representation before this conversation continues. Probably, Silas agreed. That would be the smart move. You're welcome to make that call. He paused. After you answer one question. Garrett looked at him. Where is Daniel Collins? The name hit Garrett differently than Victor's name had. Victor's name had produced calculation. Daniel's name produced something closer to fear. A fast, specific fear that moved through his eyes before he could contain it. I don't know who that is. Yes, you do. Silas's voice was unchanged. And the fact that his name scared you more than the $43 million tells me something very useful about what you actually know. Garrett pressed his lips together. Is he alive? Silas asked quietly. A long pause. Then Garrett's voice came out lower than before. I don't know where he is. I swear I don't know where he is. I was never told. Victor handled that directly. He never told me what happened to him. What did Victor tell you about Daniel Collins 7 years ago? He said there was an employee who had found information he shouldn't have found and that the situation had been managed. He said the employee was gone and it wasn't something I needed to know more about. Garrett's voice had taken on a quality that was trying not to sound like pleading and not entirely succeeding. I didn't ask questions. I knew better than to ask questions. So you knew someone had been removed to protect this operation. You knew someone had been made to disappear, and you continued anyway. Garrett said nothing. Silas stood up. Make your call. He walked out. In the hallway outside, he stood alone for 30 seconds. He was alive. Garrett didn't know where Daniel was, but the way he'd said it, the phrasing, the specific quality of not knowing suggested that not knowing was different from the other answer. Victor had managed it directly and hadn't told Garrett the details, which meant there were details to not know. Daniel could be alive. Silas went back upstairs. He told Emma what Garrett had said. He watched her process it. She was very still for a moment. Then she pressed both hands over her mouth briefly. Then she took them down and breathed steadily. He doesn't know where he is. No. But he didn't say he was dead. He said Victor managed it and he wasn't told the details. Emma looked at him. That could mean anything. It could mean many things, but one of the things it could mean is that your brother is somewhere and not dead. Victor is a man who is careful about exposure. A dead man is evidence. A man who has simply ceased to exist creates much less. He held her gaze. I'm not telling you this to give you false hope. I'm telling you because it's what the information actually suggests. Emma stood up and walked once across the room and came back. How do we find him? Victor Hale is going to walk into this building tonight with 7 years of secrets and the working assumption that he is still the most protected person in the room. Silas's voice was quiet and certain. When he leaves, he is not going to have that assumption anymore. And once he no longer has it, what he knows about Daniel Collins becomes the most important thing he has to bargain with. Emma stared at him. You're going to use the meeting tonight? Yes. To make him tell you where Daniel is? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what if he doesn't know? Then we find out what he does know, and we work from there. He paused. But I think he knows. A man who has been managing this operation for 9 years does not leave important variables unaccounted for. Daniel is a variable. Victor accounts for his variables. Emma sat back down. Her hands were steady. Her voice when she spoke was completely even. What do you need me to do? He looked at her. Nothing tonight. Tonight you stay upstairs. You stay away from Victor Hale entirely. He doesn't know you exist, and that is a protection I want you to keep." She started to say something. "Emma." His voice was not hard, but it was firm in the particular way of someone who is not negotiating. "Your brother spent 7 years keeping you out of this. He made decisions that cost him his own life, as he knew it, specifically to keep you away from Victor Hale. I am not going to undo that by putting you in the same room with the man tonight." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she exhaled slowly. "All right. Thank you." She looked at him sharply. "Don't thank me. Find my brother. That's what tonight is for." Victor arrived at 7:15. He came alone, which was what he always did for these meetings. A man who came to review accounts alone was a man who trusted the room he was walking into. That was how Victor had always played it. The unspoken signal of trust by behavior, the thing that built the kind of closeness that made a person invisible. Silas met him in the main room, and they moved upstairs to the office together, easy and familiar, the way they had done dozens of times. Victor set his coffee on the desk, same order, still too sweet. He opened the leather portfolio he always brought to these meetings. He asked about the previous month's performance on 2 accounts. Silas answered both questions correctly. Victor made a note. He was relaxed, or performing relaxed. Silas was now watching for the seams, and there were seams, small ones, barely there. The way his pen paused fractionally before moving. The way his eyes came back to Silas's face a half-beat more often than usual. He was checking. Not obviously, but he was checking. "There's one other thing I want to discuss," Silas said. Victor looked up. Of course. Silas reached into the desk drawer and produced a printed summary. 3 pages. Reeves had prepared it that afternoon. A clean, precise distillation of what was on the drive. The company structures, the transfer patterns, the amounts, the dates, the signatures. He set it on the desk and pushed it across to Victor without saying anything else. Victor looked at the first page. The performance of relaxation ended. It didn't end dramatically. It ended the way a light ends when a switch is flipped. A quiet, complete cessation. His face didn't crumble. He was too controlled for that. But something fundamental in his posture changed. The leaning forward attentiveness of a man in a comfortable meeting became something slightly different, slightly more contained, the physical adjustment of someone whose body has received information that the mind is still working to process. He looked at the second page, then the third. He set the pages down. He looked at Silas. "Where did you get this?" His voice was even. Silas gave him credit for that. Even now his voice was even. "Daniel Collins," Silas said. The name hit him the way it was intended to. Victor's jaw tightened once, a brief involuntary contraction. Daniel Collins is gone. The documentation he spent 7 years building is not. Silas held his gaze across the desk. He spent 7 years building that drive while you spent 7 years thinking you had managed the situation. You hadn't. You had just managed to delay it. Victor was quiet. He was thinking. Silas could see him thinking, the particular quality of a very intelligent person, making rapid calculations under conditions that were not favorable to them. "What do you want?" Victor said. "I want 2 things. The first is where Daniel Collins is right now." Victor's expression moved. "I don't know what happened to Daniel Collins." "Victor." Silas's voice was completely calm. "I had a conversation with Thomas Garrett this afternoon. He told me you handled Daniel directly and didn't share the details, which means you have details." A pause. "Garrett is a liability. Garrett is in the lower office with Marco and no phone. That situation is handled." Silas leaned forward slightly. "Where is Daniel Collins?" Victor looked at the pages on the desk. He looked at Silas. He made a calculation that Silas watched him make in real time, the assessment of what was known, what was not known, what could be verified, what the leverage structure actually looked like from where Victor was sitting. "He's in Cincinnati," Victor said finally. "He's been in Cincinnati for 6 years. He has a different name. He works in bookkeeping for a restaurant group. He is alive and completely ordinary, and nobody has touched him." Silas absorbed that. Why? He asked. Victor looked at him with something that was almost honest. Because eliminating him created more exposure than containing him. A missing person stays missing. A dead man eventually gets found and gets investigated. Collins understood that pressing his disappearance would only accelerate things for him. He chose to stay gone. I chose to let him stay gone. It was a stable arrangement. For you. For both of us. Silas let that sit for a moment. Let Victor believe for a moment longer that this was a conversation between two people negotiating from comparable positions. Then he said, "The second thing I want is a full accounting. Every company, every account, every transfer, every person you brought into this. You are going to sit in this room with Reeves, and you are going to walk through all of it. Everything that is not already documented on that drive." Victor's expression shifted. "And in exchange, the federal contact I spoke with this afternoon receives a package of documentation with your full cooperation noted. That cooperation is the only thing that makes any difference to what the next few years of your life look like. You've already talked to federal contacts." "Yes." Victor looked at him. The calculation was still running behind his eyes, but it was running against a closed set of options now, and he could see the walls. "You moved fast. I had good documentation." Silas paused. "Thanks to Daniel Collins." Something moved across Victor's face at that. Not remorse exactly. Something more complicated. The expression of a man who had spent years identifying a specific variable as a threat, and was now sitting with the full understanding of exactly how completely that variable had defeated him. He was more thorough than I expected. He had 7 years and significant motivation. I should have seen it. "You should have." Silas's voice was level. "But you spent too long believing that because you were the most trusted person in the room, you were also the most dangerous. You forgot to account for people who aren't interested in being dangerous, just in being right." Victor said nothing. Silas stood up. "I'm going to get Reeves. You're going to spend the next 4 hours walking through everything. And Victor." He paused at the door. "If I find one single omission in what you tell him tonight, the cooperation arrangement becomes irrelevant. Am I clear?" "Yes," Victor said. His voice was quiet and defeated, and completely different from the voice he had walked in with. Silas opened the door. Marco was in the hallway. He had positioned himself there without being asked, because Marco had been doing this long enough to know when positioning himself in a hallway was the right thing to do. Silas looked at him. "Stay on that door." "Understood." A pause. "How did it go?" "The way it needed to." Silas moved down the hallway. "Get Reeves up here." He went upstairs. Emma opened the door before he knocked again. She had been standing near it again. He was beginning to understand that when she was worried, she moved toward exits rather than away from them. She looked at his face. "Tell me." "Cincinnati," he said. "He's been in Cincinnati for 6 years. Different name, clean life, nobody has touched him." He watched her face go through something that he did not have a name for, a cascading sequence of expressions that moved too fast to track relief and fury and grief, and something that might have been the specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding their breath for 3 months and has finally been told they can stop. He's alive, Emma." She put one hand on the doorframe. He gave her a moment. She pulled in a long breath, held it, let it out. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. He had the sense that she had learned over years of difficult things to defer the crying to a later, more private moment. "You're sure?" Victor confirmed it. "It aligns with the logic of how he operated. Eliminating your brother created more exposure than letting him disappear and stay disappeared. Daniel understood that too. It's why he stayed gone. He protected himself. And you. He couldn't contact you without creating a trail." Emma's jaw tightened. 6 years. He's been 60 miles away for 6 years. "Emma." "I know." She pressed her lips together. "I know why. I understand the logic. I just—" She stopped. 6 years. He could have been closer than 6 years. Silas said nothing. There was nothing useful to say to that, and he was learning that Emma Collins did not need people to fill her silences. She needed them to hold still inside them. "What happens now?" she asked. "Victor is downstairs with Reeves. He is going to spend the next 4 hours accounting for everything he hid. That documentation goes to federal authorities within 48 hours. Silas paused. "And then we go get your brother." Emma looked at him sharply. As soon as Victor gives me enough to know the situation is fully contained. I'm not going to bring Daniel back into a situation that still has loose ends." He held her gaze. 2 days, Emma. Maybe less. She breathed out slowly. 2 days. He's been safe for 6 years. He'll be safe for 2 more days. She nodded once, the same decisive nod he had seen from her, before the one that meant she had made a decision and would hold to it. "Okay." Then after a pause in a quieter voice, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." "I'm not thanking you for finishing it," she said. "I'm thanking you for believing him." The next 4 hours were methodical. Victor went through everything with Reeves. Silas sat in twice for the first hour and the last. The middle 2 hours he spent in his office going through the secondary accounts, the ones that hadn't been on Daniel's drive, because Daniel accessed them, the ones that Victor was now laying out with the resigned precision of a man who understood that the only direction available to him was forward. Webb the lawyer was contacted at 9:15. He retained his own counsel within the hour, which was the intelligent move. His cooperation was formally negotiated by 11. Garrett remained in the lower office throughout. He spoke briefly with Reeves at 10, confirming 3 specific account structures and signing a written statement. He looked when Silas saw him briefly in the hallway, like a man who had slept badly for several years without knowing it, and had only just been told the reason. At midnight, Victor Hale was escorted from the building by Marco and 2 others to a location that would hold him cleanly and safely until the federal handover was arranged. Silas stood in the quiet of his office. 11 years. He stood in it for a while. Then he picked up a pen and a piece of paper and wrote an address in Cincinnati and a set of instructions for Marco to begin running quietly, because when he went to get Daniel Collins, he wanted to know exactly what he was walking into. He put the paper in the drawer. He went upstairs. Emma was asleep again, sitting upright on the couch this time, rather than lying down. Her arms crossed her head against the wall. She looked like a person who had told herself she was only resting her eyes. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. He thought about Daniel Collins, who had sacrificed 7 years of his life because he believed Silas Moretti was a fair man who deserved to know the truth. He thought about Emma Collins, who had walked through rain to the most dangerous address in Chicago with a canvas bag full of evidence and her mother's pocket knife because her brother had asked her to, and she loved him. He thought about the version of himself that had accepted Victor's documentation 7 years ago and closed the door on Daniel Collins without hesitation. He had been a man who trusted the wrong people for a long time. How was beginning carefully and without drama to understand what it would mean to be a different kind of man. He pulled the door closed. He went back to his desk. He had work to finish. At 2 in the morning, Reeves knocked on his office door and came in without waiting. Silas looked up. Reeves was carrying a single sheet of paper. He set it on the desk without preamble. "I was finishing the cross-referencing on the secondary accounts Victor walked through tonight. I pulled a filing date on one of the shell company registrations to verify the timing sequence. And the company was registered 8 months before Daniel Collins was brought on to handle financial records." Reeves's voice was flat and precise. Victor didn't build this operation in response to Daniel finding it. He built it before Daniel arrived. He brought Daniel in specifically because he needed someone in the accounting position who would eventually find the anomalies. Silas stared at him. "I was planning to use Daniel as the fall man from the beginning," Reeves continued. "He didn't frame Daniel because Daniel got close to the truth. He hired Daniel because he always intended to frame someone in that position, and Daniel was the person Silas Moretti would be least likely to defend aggressively. He knew about your father's connection to Daniel's family. He knew that connection would make the betrayal feel more personal and therefore less analytically examined. The office was very quiet. He chose Daniel, Silas said, Because he knew that I would believe it. Yes. The particular cold that had been sitting in Silas's chest since the previous night dropped another degree. Victor Hale had not just stolen from him and framed an innocent man to cover it. He had engineered the entire situation from the beginning. He had identified the human relationship that would bypass Silas's judgment most effectively and had targeted it deliberately. He had chosen Daniel Collins, not despite Daniel's connection to Silas. Because of it. Silas sat with that for a long moment. "Does this change the federal documentation?" he asked. "It strengthens it. Premeditation across 9 years changes the charging structure significantly." Reeves looked at him. "I'll add it to the package." "Do that." Reeves left. Silas sat alone. I thought about Daniel, 20-something years old, brought in for accounting work, carrying the weight of a quiet promise Silas had made to a dead man's memory, working carefully and honestly and well, completely unaware that the man who had arranged his hiring had done so specifically because he was the person Silas would be most willing to discard. Not a mistake. A weapon. Victor had used Daniel's connection to Silas as the weapon to remove him. Silas put both hands flat on the desk. He breathed. He was not a man who lost control of his emotions in visible ways. He had learned that early and practiced it so long it was structural. But sitting alone at 2 a.m. with the full shape of Victor Hale's calculation finally visible, he felt something that was not quite rage and not quite grief, but contained elements of both a hard, specific, burning clarity about what had actually been done and to whom and why. Daniel Collins had not been collateral damage. He had been selected. And Silas, the man whose judgment Daniel had trusted enough to spend 7 years on a drive meant to reach him, had played his role in the plan exactly as Victor had designed. He sat with that. He was going to sit with that for a long time. He was going to let it mean what it meant and not manage it into something smaller than it was, because Daniel Collins deserved to have it mean exactly what it meant. And then he was going to go to Cincinnati, and he was going to look Daniel Collins in the face and tell him the truth. And whatever happened, that was going to happen with both of them in the same room, with no more distance and no more silence and no more 7-year walls built out of someone else's careful lies. He owed Daniel Collins that much. He owed him considerably more. But that was where it started. Marco's report came through at 6:30 in the morning. Silas had not slept. He read it standing at his desk with the early light coming through the window and the building quiet around him. The particular quiet of a place that has been through something significant and is now processing it the way a body processes a wound, not dramatically, just steadily, the slow work of repair. Daniel Collins lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building in Cincinnati's North Side neighborhood. He worked 5 days a week at a restaurant group that operated 3 locations across the city, handling their accounts under the name David Carroll. He had held the position for 4 years. His neighbors described him as quiet and reliable. His employer considered him indispensable. He had no close friends that anyone could identify, no romantic relationship, no social media presence, nothing that would create a searchable trail back to the name he had left behind. I went to a diner 2 blocks from his apartment every Sunday morning and ordered the same breakfast. He walked to work when the weather allowed. He called no one regularly, except one number, a prepaid cell, that Marco traced to a device purchased in Chicago 3 years ago, which had never been used for any other calls. Silas stared at that line for a long moment. One number. Prepaid. Chicago. Emma. Daniel had been calling Emma, or at least maintaining the ability to, keeping a line open that he never used because using it would endanger her, but keeping it because the alternative was severing the last connection to the only person he had left in the world, and that was a thing he apparently could not bring himself to do entirely. Silas set the report down. He went upstairs and knocked on Emma's door. She answered in under 10 seconds. She had not been sleeping either. "I have his address," Silas said. He gave her the report. He watched her read it. She read it the way she did everything, with focused, complete attention, her face controlled, but not closed. When she got to the part about the prepaid phone, her hand tightened on the paper and she stopped reading for a moment. "He kept a line open," she said. Her voice came out quieter than usual. He never used it. But he kept it. She pressed her lips together. Then she kept reading. When she finished, she set the paper down on the couch beside her and sat very still for a moment. He built an entire life, a completely different life. Yes. He has an employer who considers him indispensable. Yes. He orders the same breakfast every Sunday. She stopped. He always did that. Even when we were kids, he would find the thing he liked and order it every time. He said it was efficient. A pause. I used to tease him about it. Silas said nothing. He's been 60 miles away, Emma said, being efficient. Her voice was completely level, but there was something underneath it that was not level at all. Something that had been building for 3 months, and possibly longer, since the night she went to his apartment and found his wallet on the counter and his phone in the trash. When do we go? This afternoon. I want to go with a small group, just Marco and one other, and I want to go in a way that doesn't announce itself. He paused. I also want you to understand that your brother has been living as a different person for 6 years. He has been living with the knowledge that contacting you could get you killed. When we walk through his door, his first instinct is not going to be relief. Emma looked at him. What will it be? Fear. Probably. The fear that if we found him, someone else could have found him, or that our finding him means the situation he ran from has moved. He held her gaze. He is going to need a moment to understand that it's over. Emma considered that. Then she nodded slowly. I'll give him whatever moment he needs. I know you will. He paused. One more thing. He doesn't know I'm coming. He may not react well to me. She looked at him steadily. He trusted you enough to spend 7 years building a drive for you. He trusted the person he believed I could be. The person I was 7 years ago failed him significantly. Silas held her gaze. I'm not asking you to reassure me. I'm telling you so you're prepared for what the room might look like. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My brother is a fair man. He gets that from our father. When you walk in, tell him the truth. That's all he's ever wanted from anyone. They left Chicago at 2 in the afternoon. Marco drove. The other man, a quiet, capable person named Soto, who had worked with Silas for 6 years and spoken approximately 400 words in that entire time, rode in front. Silas and Emma sat in the back. They did not talk much on the drive. Emma watched the highway, and Silas watched the highway, and between them was the particular kind of shared silence that belongs to two people who have spent 36 hours in an intense situation together and have reached the point where the silence is not uncomfortable, but simply present. At one point, Emma said, What happens to Victor? Federal custody within the next 12 hours. The documentation is complete. The cooperation agreements from him and Webb are signed. The case is airtight. He paused. He will spend a significant portion of the remainder of his life in a federal facility. And Garrett? Garrett cooperated fully. His arrangement is more lenient. He'll face consequences, but he was a secondary party, and he provided valuable confirmation. Silas glanced at her. Is that satisfying to you? She thought about it honestly. I wanted him destroyed, Victor. I wanted everything he built to burn. A pause. But Daniel would say that wanting that is how you end up becoming what you fought against. She looked out the window. So I'll settle for federal custody and airtight. Your brother is a wiser person than most. He always was. A quieter note. I just didn't always tell him that. They arrived in Cincinnati at 4:30. Marco parked 2 blocks from the apartment building, and they sat for 10 minutes while Soto did a quiet pass on foot. He came back and said 3 words. Clear, he's home. Silas looked at Emma. Ready. She had been ready for 3 months. She said yes and opened the door. They went up to the 2nd floor. Marco stayed at the bottom of the stairs. Soto positioned himself in the hallway at a distance that was present but not threatening. Silas and Emma walked to the door at the end of the 2nd floor corridor. Emma knocked. Silence inside. The brief, specific silence of someone who has spent years answering doors carefully. Daniel, Emma said. Her voice was steady. It's me. It's Emma. A longer silence. Then the sound of a lock turning. Then a second lock. Then the door opened 4 inches with a security chain still across it, and a face appeared in the gap that Silas had not seen in 7 years. Older now, thinner in the jaw, with the particular wariness of someone who has been on alert for a very long time. Daniel Collins looked at his sister. His face did something that Silas was not prepared for. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. It was the face of a man who has been holding himself together with extraordinary discipline for an extraordinary length of time, and who in the space of 1 second feels the entire structure of that discipline begin to give way, not collapse, but soften the way. Something very rigid softens when it is finally after years allowed to. "Emma," he said. His voice came out rough and low and almost nothing. "I'm here," she said. "It's over. Open the door." The chain came off. The first 5 minutes were not for Silas. He understood that immediately and stepped back. Not out of the apartment, but far enough into the corner of the small front room to give Emma and Daniel the space the moment required. He looked at the wall, and he looked at his own hands, and he listened to 2 siblings who had been separated for 3 months and effectively for 6 years find each other in real time, not with speeches or dramatic declarations, but with the small, broken, entirely human sounds of 2 people who love each other and have been afraid and are now finally in the same room. Emma said his name twice. Daniel said her name once, and then couldn't say anything for a moment. She was crying in the quiet, contained way he had already learned was her style. The tears that came without ceremony or sound. He had his arms around her, and his face pressed against the top of her head, and his eyes were closed. Silas looked at the wall. I thought about his own life, and who he had in it, and what the honest answer to that question actually was. He thought about 11 years of Victor Hale's performed loyalty and the specific emptiness of a room full of people who served you because they needed to. He thought about the letter in his jacket pocket and the 7 years it represented. Then Daniel Collins looked up. His eyes found Silas across the room. The softness that had come in when Emma arrived did not disappear exactly, but it reorganized itself into something more guarded, more measuring. Daniel was reading the situation with the rapid, precise attentiveness of a man who had survived by reading situations accurately. Silas met his gaze and held it, and did not say anything immediately. Daniel straightened slightly. His arms stayed around Emma, but his eyes stayed on Silas. "You came." "Yes." "How did you find me?" Marco traced a pattern. "It took about 12 hours. Silas paused. "You were careful. Not invisible, careful." Something moved through Daniel's expression. "Is it over?" "Victor Hale is in federal custody. Thomas Garrett has a cooperation agreement. Marcus Webb has a cooperation agreement. The documentation you built is the backbone of a federal case that will take all 3 of them for the next several decades." Silas held his gaze. "It's over." Daniel absorbed that. He breathed in and out once deliberately. "You went federal. You spent 7 years building something that deserved to be handled correctly. I handled it correctly." Why? It was a simple word. Direct and honest in the way Silas was coming to understand was characteristic of Daniel Collins. Not why did you handle it correctly, which had an obvious answer. Why as in what changed? Why as in you believed I was a traitor for 7 years, and now you're standing in my apartment in Cincinnati? Why as in what are you actually doing here? Silas crossed the room and sat down in the chair near the small table. He did not do it to claim space. He did it to bring himself to eye level rather than standing over the moment. "Because Emma walked through the rain to my door," he said. "And because the first thing she said was that you told her I was a fair man." He paused. "I have spent 7 years believing something about you that was not true, because someone I trusted worked very hard for a very long time to make sure I would believe it. When I found out what actually happened, I had a choice about what to do with that information. I chose to do what you spent 7 years building the evidence for." Daniel was very still. "You could have handled it quietly, internally. You didn't need to go federal." "No." "Why federal then?" "Because quiet and internal was what Victor was counting on. He built his entire operation on the assumption that the way things get handled in my world is quietly and internally. I didn't want to give him the ending he planned for. A pause. And because you deserve to have it mean something. Not just resolved. Meant something. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Beside him, Emma was very still watching them both. Then Daniel said, 7 years. Yes. You believed it for 7 years. Yes. I want to hear you say that you know you were wrong. Not because I need an apology. Because I need to know that you actually understand what happened. Not just the financial part. What actually happened. Silas held his gaze without flinching. Victor Hale selected you specifically because of your connection to me. He knew that connection would make the betrayal feel personal and therefore less analytically examined. He hired you knowing he intended to frame you. I was the mechanism he used to remove you because he understood that my reaction to what he framed you for would be fast and final, and that I would not look closely enough afterward. He paused. I was used against you. And for 7 years I did not know that. And for 7 years you lived with what it cost you because of it. I was wrong. Completely wrong. And I am telling you that directly. The room was quiet for a long moment. Daniel looked at his sister. Emma was looking at Silas. Then Daniel looked back at Silas and said, I never blamed you for it. I want you to know that. I blamed Victor. I was angry at the situation. But you acted on what you were given, and what you were given was designed by someone who understood you. A pause. I blamed myself sometimes for not finding a faster way to reach you. There was no faster way. He had closed every avenue. I know. It took me 2 years to accept that. Daniel's voice was quieter now. The drive took 4 more. 6 years of work. Accounting is slow when you're doing it from a distance without access to the primary records. A small, dry note in his voice. The first break in the gravity of the conversation, and Emma made a sound that was almost a laugh, and Daniel's mouth moved at the corner. Silas looked at the two of them. Something in the room shifted, not dramatically. Just the natural shift of a situation that has been holding its breath, finally releasing it. They stayed for 2 hours. Emma sat beside her brother on the small couch in the apartment he had built under a different name in a city 60 miles from home. And they talked the way people talk when they have too much to cover and know they will not cover it all today, and that is somehow all right. She told him about the diner, about the coworkers he had asked after on that last Tuesday evening, before he disappeared, about the small details of a life he had not been able to be part of. He listened with the focused attention of someone who has been starving for ordinary information about ordinary things. Silas sat across from them and mostly listened. At one point, Daniel looked at him and said, "What happens now for you, the organization?" Silas considered the question honestly. Victor's removal creates a gap. There are structures that will need to be rebuilt, accounts that will need to be restructured, positions that will need to be filled by people who are actually what they present themselves as. He paused. It will take time. Do you trust your own judgment now? After this, it was a pointed question, not cruel, just direct. I trust it differently, Silas said, more carefully, with less assumption. He looked at Daniel steadily. You trusted mine even after what happened. That carries weight with me. I trusted who you could be, not who you were being. Daniel held his gaze. There's a difference. I'm learning that. It's worth learning. At another point, Emma said to Silas almost casually, as if the question were small, what happens to us? Now that this is done, what happens to Daniel? Can he come home? Silas looked at her, then at Daniel. The people who knew who he was are in federal custody or have cooperation agreements that make any move against him more dangerous to themselves than worthless. The situation that made disappearing necessary no longer exists. He paused. He can come home. Emma's hand tightened on Daniel's arm. Daniel looked at the window. Something moved through his face that was too complex and too private for Silas to read fully, the look of a man hearing something he had stopped allowing himself to fully imagine and is now being asked to imagine it again. Home, Daniel said quietly. Not a question, just the word held for a moment. Home, Emma said. Before they left, Daniel asked to speak with Silas alone for a few minutes. Emma went to the kitchen without comment. She was good at reading moments. Daniel looked at Silas directly. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "The drive, the documentation. You said it's the backbone of the federal case." He paused. "My name is on some of that documentation, not as a perpetrator, as a discoverer, as the person who compiled it. That means my name comes up in federal proceedings." Yes, David Carroll is going to stop being a viable identity at some point in that process. It was already going to stop being viable when we walked through your door this afternoon. Silas held his gaze. "Your real name is on no criminal documentation. You are a witness and a victim, in this case, not a subject. Your name comes up as the person who built the evidence that brought the case forward." He paused. "You are not a man with a secret anymore, Daniel. You are a man with a record." Daniel absorbed that. "A record of what?" he said quietly. "Of doing the right thing for 7 years against considerable personal cost." Silas looked at him steadily. "That is your record." Daniel looked down for a moment. His jaw moved. Then he looked back up. "I need a real job. When I come home, I need something legitimate. Something where my accounting background is actually used, something I can build from. I know people." Daniel's expression shifted slightly. "Not in your world. I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean not in your world. I know people outside my world too." Silas allowed the small pause that the moment earned. "Daniel, you spent 6 years running the accounts of a restaurant group under a different name. You have a reference from an employer who considers you indispensable and has no idea who you actually are. And you have documentation of financial analysis work that in the context of a federal case will be examined by people with the ability to recognize how good it is." He held his gaze. "You will have options, real ones." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he put out his hand. Silas looked at it for a half second, then shook it. It was a simple gesture. It was not simple at all. "Thank you," Daniel said, "for coming." "Thank you," Silas said, "for the letter." On the drive back to Chicago, Emma sat in the back seat and looked out the window for the first hour without saying anything. Silas sat beside her and looked at the highway. After a while she said, "He's going to be okay." "Yes. He looked older." She paused. "But he looked like himself. Underneath all of it, he looked like himself." "He maintained who he was," Silas said. "That's not nothing. 7 years is a long time to maintain who you are under those conditions." Emma was quiet for a moment. "You both did." Silas looked at her. "You could have handled this quietly," she said. "Internally, the way Victor expected. You could have cleaned it up and moved on and gone back to what you were. But you went federal. You made it mean something." She paused. "That's who you are. Underneath all of it. That's who you are." He had no immediate answer to that. He looked at the highway. She was right, or she was describing something he was trying to be, and the gap between those two things was where the work was. He was honest enough with himself to know the distinction. "Daniel comes home next week," he said. "He needs time to close things in Cincinnati cleanly. His employer deserves a real notice. There are things he set up under the other name that need to be properly handed off. Of course he's doing it properly," Emma said, with the soft exasperation of someone talking about a person they know completely. "Of course he is. He asked me for a legitimate job contact." "What did you say?" "I said I knew people." Emma looked at him sideways. "Do you?" "I have spent 20 years in this city, building relationships with a wide range of people across multiple industries. Several of them owe me favors that have nothing to do with anything Victor Hale touched." A pause. "Yes, I know people." She looked at him for a moment longer. "You didn't have to do any of this, you know. You could have read the letter and weighed your options and decided that the risk of touching Victor's operation outweighed the benefit. A lot of people in your position would have made that calculation. Possibly. But you didn't." "No." "Why not?" He thought about it honestly. Not the polished answer. The real one. Because Daniel Collins believed I was a fair man and spent 7 years acting on that belief. And because you walked through rain to hand me a letter and looked at me like someone who had decided to trust me based on nothing but your brother's word. He paused. At some point, a person has to decide whether they are going to be what the people who believe in them believe they are. Emma looked at him. Then she looked back at the highway. Daniel was right about you, she said quietly. Silas said nothing, but something in his chest, something that had been tight and cold since 2 in the morning when Reeves laid the full shape of Victor's plan on his desk, loosened by 1 degree. It was not absolution. He was not looking for absolution. But it was something. They arrived back in Chicago at 8:30 that evening. Marco pulled up to the Meridian Club, and Silas got out and then held the door for Emma. She stepped out and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building that she had stood outside of in the rain 2 nights ago, with a canvas bag and her mother's folding knife and an address and a desperate plan. 2 nights ago, I was standing right here, she said. Yes. It feels like considerably longer than 2 nights. It was a considerable amount of 2 nights. She looked at him. What happens now tonight, I mean? Tonight you sleep, Silas said. Actually sleep. In an actual bed in the guest room on the 3rd floor with a lock on the door and nothing pressing on you. He paused. Tomorrow, there will be things to handle. Federal contacts to update. Logistics for Daniel's return. A number of organizational matters that did not pause because my world went sideways. He looked at her. But tonight is for sleeping. Emma looked at him for a moment. There was something in her expression that was evaluating and warm at the same time, the look of a person who is deciding how to say something that matters to them. You're different, she said. From 2 nights ago. Am I? Yes. You were careful then. Controlled. You let me talk, and you asked precise questions, and you were fair, but you were behind something. Behind glass. She paused. You're not behind it anymore. He considered denying it. He did not. No. What changed? He thought about it honestly. I spent 2 nights being reminded what it looks like when people act from something other than self-interest. Your brother spent 7 years acting from principle when it cost him everything. You walked into my building because you loved him, and he asked you to, and you chose to trust a dangerous stranger because your brother said to. He paused. It is difficult to spend 2 days with that quality of example without it affecting you. Emma looked at him steadily. You've always had it in you. Someone just worked very hard for a long time to bury it. Victor. People like Victor. She held his gaze. You let them get too close. Because you were alone, and power is isolating, and having someone reliable feels like something you should hold on to even when the reliability is performed. She paused. Daniel saw that about you. He said it in the letter, the part you read to me. He said you deserved better than what you had. Silas looked at the building. He was right, he said. Emma nodded once. Get some sleep too, she said. You look like a man who hasn't slept in 40 years. He looked at her. She looked back at him with complete composure and the faintest suggestion of something that might, under different circumstances, and with more time, become a real smile. He held the door open for her. She walked inside. He followed, and somewhere across the city, in a federal holding arrangement organized in the last 12 hours, Victor Hale sat with $43 million of documentation and the particular silence of a man who had spent 9 years believing he was the most careful person in any room he entered, and had now discovered with complete certainty that he had been wrong about that for a very long time. At 11 that night, Silas sat alone in his office for the last time in what felt like a very long time. He had one more call to make. He dialed a number he had not called in 7 years. A number he had kept in his memory because some things you keep even when you tell yourself there is no longer a reason to. It rang 3 times. A voice picked up. Hello? A voice he recognized. A voice that had been 60 miles away for 6 years. Daniel, Silas said. I have a contact at Harmon Financial Group. His name is Peter Albright. He owes me a conversation. I'll send you his number tomorrow. A pause on the other end. Then Daniel Collins, 60 miles away, in an apartment he was about to close, permanently said, "Thank you, Silas." "Get some rest," Silas said. "You're coming home next week." He hung up. He sat in the quiet for one more moment. Then he turned off the desk lamp. And for the first time in 2 days, in what might have been considerably longer, Silas Moretti let himself simply stop. Daniel Collins came home on a Thursday. He came with one bag. Not because he had nothing else, but because he had made a decision in Cincinnati about what he was bringing back and what he was leaving behind, and the decision was clean and deliberate, the way all of Daniel's decisions were. The apartment was sublet to a graduate student. The employer received 2 weeks of proper handover documentation, organized with the same precision that had made David Carroll indispensable for 4 years. The prepaid phone was powered off for the last time and placed in a drawer that belonged to a life he was done living. He called Emma from the road. She was at the diner when he called halfway through a lunch shift, and she stepped into the back hallway with the phone pressed against her ear and stood against the wall and listened to her brother's voice. Tell her he was 2 hours out and ask whether she wanted him to come directly to her apartment or meet somewhere. "Come to the diner," she said immediately. "I'll tell Pauline I have a family situation. She'll cover my tables. You don't have to cut your shift short." "Daniel." A pause. "Okay," he said. "I'll come to the diner." She hung up and stood in the hallway for 30 seconds with her hand flat against the wall. Then she went to find Pauline. Silas knew Daniel was coming home because Emma had texted him that morning. A short message, 2 sentences. "Daniel leaves Cincinnati today. He'll be in Chicago by early afternoon." That was all. She was not a person who over-explained. He read the message at his desk and set the phone down and sat with it for a moment. In the 9 days since Cincinnati, he had dealt with the structural aftermath of removing Victor Hale Garrett and Webb from his world simultaneously. It was by any measure a significant undertaking. 3 people with 11 years, 5 years, and 8 years of access. Respectively, each holding different pieces of the architecture of his operation, had to be excised cleanly and replaced carefully. New accounting oversight was the first priority. Legal counsel was the second. The third was a quiet, thorough audit of every account structure Victor had touched to ensure nothing had been missed. No secondary arrangement left running, no small tributary of redirected money still flowing somewhere undetected. Reeves had been running 16-hour days. Silas had been running longer. But the work was being done, and it was being done correctly, and there was something in the specific discipline of dismantling what was wrong and rebuilding it on honest ground that felt different from the work he had done before. Not easier, harder in some ways, but cleaner. Like the difference between carrying weight and putting it down. Peter Albright at Harmon Financial had responded to Silas's call within 3 hours. He had asked one question about Daniel's background, and Silas had answered it honestly, including the part about the 7 years, including the context. Albright had been quiet for a moment, and then said, "A man who can build that quality of documentation under those conditions is someone I want in a room with my compliance team." The conversation had lasted 11 minutes. At the end of it, Albright had an appointment scheduled with Daniel for the following Monday. Silas had not told Emma about the call. He had told Daniel directly. Daniel had said, "You told him the truth about the 7 years." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you are done hiding things," Silas said. "And because the truth about the 7 years is not a liability. It is the most accurate description of your professional capability that exists." A long pause. Then Daniel said, "You've changed." "I'm working on it," Silas said. Emma called him at 3:15 that afternoon. He picked up on the second ring. "He's here," she said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone trying to sound normal while containing something very large. "He's sitting at the counter. He looks thin. He ordered the special without looking at the menu." Silas found himself almost smiling. "Of course he did. He asked about you." A pause. "He wanted to know how you were doing, not the situation. How you were doing." Silas looked at his desk. At the surface of it clean now, the way it hadn't been clean in 9 days. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I thought you were figuring something out. Another pause. Was that right? Yes, Silas said. That was right. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He wants to see you, not today. He said he needs a few days to breathe first. But he wants to see you. I'll be here whenever he's ready. Silas. Yes, thank you. Her voice was quiet and direct. I know I've said it. I want to say it again. Emma. Don't tell me not to thank you. I wasn't going to, he said. I was going to say you're welcome. A brief silence. Then she said, Pauline wants to know if you want me to put something in a box for you. She says anyone Emma considers a friend eats free. Something in his chest moved in a way that caught him slightly off guard. Tell Pauline thank you. I will. A pause. I'll tell her you said yes. He didn't argue. The federal case moved with the efficiency of something that had been given everything it needed and asked to do nothing more than proceed. The documentation from Daniel's drive formed the structural core. Victor's cooperation agreement, Garrett's statement, and Webb's legal accounting of the structures he had built provided the surrounding architecture. 3 separate assistant U.S. attorneys had reviewed the package within 48 hours of Silas's formal handover and described the documentation as among the most comprehensive financial fraud evidence they had received from a non-governmental source. One of them, a woman named Carver, who had the precise and unimpressed manner of someone who had seen most things and been fooled by very few of them, called Silas directly on the 4th day. I want to understand the provenance of the primary documentation, she said. The drive. A man named Daniel Collins compiled it over 7 years while living under an assumed identity, following a targeted framing by the primary subject. A pause. He spent 7 years building this case from hiding. Yes. While the person who framed him continued operating inside your organization. Yes. Another pause. Mr. Moretti, I have been doing this work for 19 years. I want you to tell Daniel Collins that what he built is exceptional. Not adequate, exceptional. Silas passed that on to Daniel that evening in a text message. Daniel's response came back in 4 minutes. 2 words. Tell her thank you. Silas forwarded it to Carver. She responded, He's welcome. On the 6th day after Daniel came home, Emma called Silas at 7 in the morning. He was already at his desk. I need to tell you something, she said. Tell me. I've been thinking about the restaurant. A pause. My mother used to talk about opening a place, when we were kids. She had recipes, a whole collection of them, things her own mother taught her and things she developed herself. She was a good cook. She talked about it the way people talk about things they believe they'll do eventually and then run out of time for. Emma's voice was measured, but there was something underneath it that was alive in a specific way. I've been thinking that I could do it. Not big, small. A real neighborhood place. The kind of place that doesn't try to be anything except what it is. Silas listened. I have some savings, she said. Not enough. Not close to enough for a real space in this city. But Daniel is coming on well, and he wants to be involved with the business side, the numbers, the structure, and I know how to run a floor, and I know what my mother's food tasted like, and I think. She stopped. I think it's time to stop waiting for later. Silas was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking you for money, Emma said immediately. I want to be clear about that. That's not why I'm telling you. I know that. I'm telling you because you asked me once why I didn't use my business degree, and I told you later wasn't arriving. A pause. Later arrived. Yes, Silas said. It did. I wanted you to know. He sat at his desk. He thought about what he wanted to say and what the correct version of it was, the version that was honest, without overstepping the version that reflected what he actually understood about who Emma Collins was. I know a commercial real estate broker, he said. He handles neighborhood properties, not the large developments. He knows where the spaces with good bones and honest landlords are before they list publicly. He paused. I'll give you his number. You call him on your own timeline. You tell him what you need, and you make your own decision. Emma was quiet for a moment. Just his number, she said. Just his number. Another pause. Okay, she said. Emma. Yes. Your mother's recipes. What kind of food? A warmth came into her voice that he hadn't heard at that particular frequency before. American home cooking. The real kind. The kind that takes all day and doesn't apologize for it. A pause. Pot roast. Chicken and dumplings. Pie that actually tastes like something. That, Silas said quietly, is exactly what this city needs more of. She laughed. A real one, short and genuine, the first time he had heard her laugh fully. It was a good sound. I'll call your broker, she said. Daniel came to the Meridian Club on a Tuesday evening 10 days after coming home. He came alone. He texted Emma beforehand, and she texted Silas a chain of information passed through the person who connected them both, which was exactly accurate. Marco brought him up. Silas was in the office. He stood when Daniel came in, a small gesture, the kind of gesture that meant something in the vocabulary of how men in Silas's world moved through rooms. Daniel looked the same as he had in Cincinnati, and different. Same as he had in Cincinnati, because 9 days was not enough to change the physical evidence of 6 years. Different because he was here in this building, in this room, and he was not hiding. He looked around the office once, taking it in. Then he looked at Silas. Bigger than I expected, he said. Sit down, Daniel. He sat. Silas sat across from him. Between them, the desk that had held Victor's performance for 11 years, the desk where Silas had read Daniel's letter by lamplight, the desk where everything had shifted. How's the apartment? Silas asked. Temporary. I'm looking. Daniel's voice was easier than it had been in Cincinnati. Not relaxed exactly, but no longer carrying the specific weight of someone who has been on alert for 6 years. Emma found a building 2 neighborhoods over from her place. I'm going to look at it this weekend. Good. The Albright meeting is Monday. I know. You called in a favor for that. I made a call, Silas said. What Albright does with it is his own decision. Daniel looked at him steadily. Why? Because you need a legitimate start, and you have the capability to make good on it, and I had the ability to open the door. He paused. It's a simple equation. It's not simple, not from where I'm sitting. Daniel held his gaze. You could have handled the Victor situation internally, made the problem go away, and moved on. Instead, you went federal. You came to Cincinnati personally. You spent 9 days restructuring your own organization from the inside. You called in favors for me, and I hear from Emma that you sent her a real estate broker's number this morning. He paused. That is not a simple equation. That is a significant amount of work and personal exposure for people you had no obligation to. Silas looked at him. Yes, he said, it is. So I'm asking you why, honestly, not the polished version. Silas was quiet for a moment. He gave the question the honest treatment it deserved. Because I spent 20 years building something on the wrong foundation. I built it on the assumption that power was its own justification, and that the people around me were assets and liabilities rather than people. Victor was the logical conclusion of that philosophy. A man who understood my philosophy better than I did, and used it against me for 11 years. He paused. You showed up in my world 7 years ago as someone who did not operate that way. And I discarded you because someone who understood me very well told me to. That has not sat well with me for a long time, even when I believed you had betrayed me. Even then. He met Daniel's eyes. When Emma walked through my door, what I felt was not suspicion. It was the specific discomfort of a man who has been wrong about something important, and is about to find out exactly how wrong. Daniel was quiet. I'm not asking for anything in return, Silas continued. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not connection to my world. Emma's restaurant, your job, your life, none of it needs to have anything to do with me after this. I want you to understand that. I do understand it. Daniel paused. That's actually why I'm here. Silas looked at him. I spent 6 years, Daniel said slowly, thinking about what I would say to you if I ever got the chance. I had a lot of versions. Some of them were angry. Some of them were just an explanation, just wanting you to know what actually happened. Some of them were. He stopped. Some of them were smaller than that, just wanting to hear you say you knew you were wrong. Just that. He looked at the desk between them. But sitting here now, I don't want any of those versions. What I actually want to say is this. He looked up. You had a choice about who to be when this landed in front of you. Not just what to do about Victor. Who to be. And you chose to be someone worth the 7 years I spent on that drive. The office was very quiet. Silas held Daniel's gaze. Thank you, he said. It came out quieter than he intended. Don't thank me. Daniel's voice was steady. Just keep being that person. 3 weeks after that conversation, Emma signed a lease on a space in Wicker Park. It was not large. It was not grand. It had good bones and an honest landlord and a kitchen that needed work but had the right size and the right layout for the kind of cooking that took all day and didn't apologize for it. The broker, true to what Silas had implied, had known about it before it listed and had gotten her in first. She called Silas the evening she signed. I have a space, she said. I know. The broker told me you called him. I want to be open in 4 months. Daniel is handling the business structure. I'm handling everything else. A pause. I need a name. For the restaurant. Yes. I've been going back and forth. Daniel wants something with our family name. I keep thinking about our mother. She used to say that the best food was food that made you feel like someone was glad you came. That was her whole philosophy. Emma's voice was warm and a little distant, the tone of someone visiting a memory they love. She used to say, "Come in, you're expected." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Call it expected," he said. A long pause. "Expected," Emma repeated slowly. "You're expected. Come in. Someone is glad you came." The pause stretched out. He could hear her breathing on the other end. "That's it," she said softly. "That's exactly it. Your mother would approve." "She would have loved you," Emma said. And then, as if she had not quite intended to say it out loud, she went quiet. Silas looked at his desk. "Go design your restaurant," he said quietly. "I'm going." A pause. "Silas?" "Yes. Come eat when we open. That's not a favor, that's an invitation." "I'll be there," he said. The night before Expected opened. Silas walked past it. He did not plan to. He was returning from a meeting 2 neighborhoods over, and the route took him close enough that he turned without thinking, or perhaps with the kind of thinking that happens below the level of deliberate decision. The windows were lit from inside. Through the glass he could see Emma moving, talking to the 2 people she had hired for the floor, pointing at something, demonstrating something with her hands. She was wearing a different version of herself than the soaked waitress who had stood outside his club in the rain 6 weeks ago. Same person, but lighter. The specific lightness of someone doing what they are supposed to be doing. Daniel was visible at the back, near what must have been the small office, talking on his phone with a piece of paper in his other hand. Silas stood on the sidewalk. He had been a man who controlled a significant portion of this city's underground for 2 decades. He had been feared and respected and isolated and wrong about things, in ways that had cost people he should have protected. He had sat across a table from Victor Hale for 11 years and believed in the wrong man. He had also, when it mattered, chosen correctly. Not perfectly, not without cost, but correctly in the end, with the weight of someone who understood what the choice actually meant. The light inside the restaurant was warm. Emma looked up through the window, not at him specifically, just looking up from something, and for a moment, their eyes met through the glass. She raised one hand, a small wave, simple and direct. He raised his hand back. Then he kept walking. The federal case against Victor Hale, Thomas Garrett, and Marcus Webb was formally indicted 41 days after the handover. The indictment was 37 pages. It cited financial fraud, money laundering, obstruction, and conspiracy. The documentation was described in the indictment itself as having been compiled through exceptional sustained effort by an individual operating under conditions of significant personal risk. Daniel's name appeared in the indictment. His real name, Daniel Collins. He read it sitting at the small table in his new apartment in the building 2 neighborhoods over from Emma, 2 weeks after moving in on a Tuesday morning before the Harmon financial position formally started. He read it once carefully, all 37 pages, the way he read everything. Then he called Emma. "They used my real name," he said. "I know, I read it. It's public record now." "I know." Her voice was warm and steady. "How does it feel?" He thought about it honestly. "Like putting something down that I've been carrying a long time." "Good," she said. "That's exactly what it is." He set the indictment on the table. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Peter Albright's office to confirm the start date for the following Monday. The assistant put him through directly. Albright picked up and said, "Daniel, we're looking forward to it." No qualifier, no hesitation, just that. Daniel said, "So am I." He hung up. He sat in his apartment in his own name for the first time in 6 years. Outside the window, Chicago moved, the way it always moved, indifferent and relentless and completely unaware of the particular significance of one. Tuesday morning, in one ordinary apartment where one ordinary man was sitting with his own name and finding that it fit him still. Expected opened on a Friday. Every table was full by 6:30 in the evening. This was not because of advertising. Emma had not run advertising. She had told her regulars at the diner, and Daniel had mentioned it to 3 people at Harmon Financial, and the broker had apparently told someone he knew, and the way these things move through a city, when they are genuine rather than manufactured, it had moved. Silas arrived at 7. He had made a reservation under his own name, which was either a statement or simply practical. He was not entirely sure which. The person who answered when he called had said, "Of course, Mr. Moretti, we have you at 7. Without any particular inflection, which was either because Emma had prepared her staff or because the staff were professionals, probably both. The room was warm and full of sound, not the curated ambient sound of a certain kind of restaurant that wanted to seem lively. The actual sound of people talking to each other and meaning it, the particular acoustic quality of a room where the food is good and the atmosphere has not been designed to death. Emma appeared from somewhere within 3 minutes of him sitting down. She was wearing a dark apron over a simple shirt, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked in the specific context of her own place, with a full room around her entirely in her element. "You came," she said. "I said I would." She sat down across from him for approximately 45 seconds. The professional calculation of someone who had a full room and could not spend her evening at one table. "Daniel's in the back. He said to tell you the numbers from the first week at Harmon are looking strong." "Good. He also said to tell you that Albright told him directly that the recommendation from you was the most honest framing he had ever received for a candidate, and that it made him trust Daniel before they met." Silas said nothing. "He wanted you to know that," Emma said. "That honesty mattered." "It should have always mattered," Silas said quietly. "It does now." She looked at him for a moment. "Pot roast," she said. "That's what you're having. I already decided." "Did you? You look like a man who needs something that took all day to make." She stood up. "And I brought you bread. It's my mother's recipe. Tell me what you think." She was gone before he could answer. He sat in the room. Around him, the conversations of people who had come to a neighborhood place to eat real food and sit together moved through the warm air. He was not invisible here. Several people near him had recognized him quietly, the recognition of a city that knows its own. But nobody moved away. Nobody recalibrated their posture into the specific arrangement people arranged themselves into when they were near someone they feared. He was simply a man at a table. It was, he realized, something he had not been in a very long time. The bread arrived, brought by a young woman who set it down with the unaffected directness of someone trained by Emma Collins. He broke a piece. He tasted it. He sat with it for a moment. It tasted like something his own mother might have made in the years before everything became complicated, in the years when he was simply a boy, in a house where someone was cooking and he was expected home for dinner, and the world had not yet required him to become what he had become. He had not thought about that in years. He sat with the bread and the memory and the warm room around him, and let himself simply be in it. Later, after the dinner crowd had thinned, Daniel came out from the back. He sat down across from Silas with 2 cups of coffee and the ease of a man who is tired in the good way, the way of someone who has worked hard at something that matters to them. "How was the pot roast?" he said. "It was the best thing I've eaten in years." Daniel smiled. A real one, relaxed and genuine, the smile of the man behind the 7 years of careful work and the 6 years of hiding and the controlled wariness of Cincinnati. Just Daniel Collins, sitting with coffee after a long day, smiling. "Emma will want to hear that. I'll tell her." They sat in comfortable quiet for a moment. Then Daniel said, "How is the restructuring?" "Complete. The accounts are clean. The new legal counsel started last week. Reeves has been running audits on the secondary structures and everything is verified." Silas paused. "It is the most thoroughly examined set of accounts my organization has ever had." "Good. It should have always been that way." Daniel looked at him. "Yes, but it is now." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "That's what matters. Not the years it wasn't. The fact that it is now." Silas looked at him. "You are a very forgiving person." "I'm a practical person," Daniel said. "Holding on to the years it wasn't doesn't change them. Doing the work to make it different does." He paused. "You did the work. That's real." "You did the work first," Silas said. 7 years of it." Daniel considered that. "We both did what we had to do when we had to do it." He looked at his coffee. "And then Emma walked through your door in the rain, and the whole thing moved. She would object to being described as the thing that moved it." "Yes," Daniel said with the specific tone of a brother who knows his sister precisely. "She absolutely would." They sat with that for a moment. Then Silas said, "She named it after something your mother used to say." Daniel looked up. "Expected," Silas said. "You're expected. Come in. Someone is glad you came." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through his face that was private and deep and entirely his own. "She told you that?" "Yes." He looked down at the coffee. "My mother would have made a comment about a Mafia boss eating pot roast in her daughter's restaurant." A pause. "Then she would have given him a second helping." Silas looked at the table. He was not a man who was moved easily. He was moved. "Go home, Daniel," he said quietly. "You have a Monday morning at Harmon, and you've been on your feet all day. So have you." "I'm going." Silas stood. He reached for his wallet. Daniel put a hand up. "Emma said you don't pay tonight." "Emma is running a business. Emma is the boss of this room, and what she says goes." Daniel held his gaze calmly. "Trust me, I tried the same argument. It doesn't work." Silas looked at him. Then he put his wallet back in his pocket. "Tell her the pot roast was exceptional," he said. "And tell her the bread was better." Daniel nodded once. "I will." Silas buttoned his jacket. He looked around the room one more time. The warm light, the sound of people, the smell of food that had taken all day and made no apologies about it. A restaurant named for something a woman said to people she was glad to see. He walked to the door. Emma appeared from somewhere as he reached it, the way she always appeared, as if she had an internal sense of where the room needed her. "Well," she said. "The bread was better than the pot roast," he said. "And the pot roast was exceptional." She looked at him with the clear, warm directness that had been the first thing he noticed about her on a rain-soaked sidewalk 6 weeks ago. "Same time next week." He looked at her. "Same time next week," he said. He stepped outside. The city was its usual self. Moving, indifferent, relentless, alive. The street was ordinary. The air was cold in the specific way of a Chicago autumn that does not care how you feel about it. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. 6 weeks ago, a woman had stood outside his door in the rain and handed him a letter from a man he had wronged and asked him to be the person that man believed he was. He had chosen to be that person. Not perfectly, not all at once, but with the committed daily unglamorous work of a man who understands that who you decide to be is not a single decision, but a sustained practice chosen again and again in the small moments as much as the large ones. A man who had spent 2 decades building power as a substitute for something he couldn't name had finally named it. Loyalty that was earned. Trust that was mutual. A table where someone was glad you came and expected you back. He had not come to that understanding easily. He had come to it through a betrayal that cost him 11 years through a wrong. He had done. That cost Daniel Collins 7 through a young woman who walked through rain on nothing but love for her brother and her brother's faith in a man who had not yet caught up to that faith. He had come to it the only way a man like Silas Moretti could come to anything real. The hard way. But he had come to it. And because he had come to it, a family was whole again. A truth was on the public record, and a restaurant in Wicker Park with a name that meant, "Come in." You're expected was full of people eating food that tasted like someone cared. He turned up the collar of his jacket against the cold. He walked into the city that had always been his, which he was only now beginning to actually know. And for the first time in 20 years, Silas Moretti was not alone in it.